Now we've got the Michigan Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson. Thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You were Secretary of State during Trump's effort to steal the election in late 2020, early 2021. I know that there were protesters outside of your home. Can you describe a little bit of what that was like?
That night or just in general?
Both.
Overseeing Michigan's highest turnout election in state history, which was also very secure and done in the midst of a pandemic, was a source of great joy and success, first and foremost. I mean, my goal as a democracy advocate and democracy defender is to ensure we always have a significant number of people who are informed and engaged in our democracy. And the fact that so many people participated and that we essentially got it right. We followed the data, we followed the best practices, and collaborated with other election officials, and essentially had a very successful election in the midst of really an unprecedented effort from the former president and many of his most ardent supporters to not just undo the results after the fact, but try to interfere with the election itself. So the entire year was a constant game of whack-a-mole where you were consistently, we all as a team were trying to anticipate where the next lie was going to come from and what it was going to be so that we could, or where the next attempt to interfere with, whether it is the election process before the election or the count of the valid ballots afterwards, and what was going to come next. And I think what I'm really proud of is, particularly up through the election, we really did stay ahead of the game. We anticipated he might try to mess with the Postal Service. So we installed over 1,000 drop boxes all around Michigan to ensure people could return their absentee or early ballots successfully and securely, even if the Postal Service was unreliable, as in some ways it ultimately shown to be. And it wasn't really until January 6th where they outplayed us in a way in that we never could have anticipated that challenge and threat. So it was really a constant effort of hoping for the best, but preparing for every contingency. And the vast majority of times we met that need and we ultimately saw a successful election. But, it was also a constant sense of every day would think, surely this is as low as they could go. And then it got worse up until January 6th, where we said, okay, we're done giving anyone the benefit of the doubt. And we're just going to move forward and protect democracy.
And so walk me through that night at your house and kind of like what kind of an eye-opening experience that was for you. And did it inform why you're running for re-election now?
The night where protesters showed up outside my home was a harrowing one. It was filled with uncertainty, because from the moment where we first heard people might be showing up at a female elected official's house to the moment we heard the noise outside to really the whole thing was done, it was filled with a constant sense of what do we do? How do we protect ourselves? What's going to happen? And at the same time, it was overlaid with a real sense of purpose and duty to protect the will of the people in Michigan, knowing that these folks outside my home weren't protesting me, they were protesting democracy. They were protesting the results of a legitimate presidential election. And my job was to protect those results. I started my career in Montgomery, Alabama, investigating hate groups and hate crimes throughout the country, and was really getting a sense of the sacrifices that were made in Selma, Alabama, the lives that were lost so that we could have a Voting Rights Act that instilled with me a sense of purpose for my whole career. So in many ways, I just felt connected to those who've come before us to protect democracy in that evening. Wasn't without its scariness and, the harrowing moments of just trying to keep my family safe. But at the same time, I'm wondering where the police were and why it was taking so long for them to get there. But at the same time, connecting with a real sense of duty that really just redoubled my purpose and increased my commitment to my work exponentially, which I imagine was the opposite impact of the intended impact of the protesters.
On that exact point, we've seen these efforts to overturn election results around the country, egged on, of course, by Trump and his acolytes. But it seems that their efforts in Michigan in particular are more dangerous. Like, we've all seen those images of fully armed militia members at the state capitol. There was obviously the kidnapping plot against the governor there. Why do these threats seem more concentrated and dangerous in your state?
I don't know what it is about Michigan in particular, although we do have a history of a large militia movement in the state. Timothy McVeigh, was the mastermind of the Oklahoma City bombings from Michigan, and the Klan was founded in Howell, Michigan. So there is a history of that here. But we're also, and up until recently, we're the only state in the country that was run by all women. And when you have decisions made and people of authority who are women, all of us, you have to imagine that engenders perhaps some negative reaction that is connected to violence. Also, the fact that the former president of the United States was frequently and consistently calling us each out on social media, in some cases directly attacking and punching, metaphorically down to these statewide officials who are simply trying to do our job. And I think what I've learned and seen is that hateful words can lead to hateful actions. And, again, that's certainly what we've endured here in our state.
So you mentioned Trump. Tell us about your opponent, because she was endorsed by Trump. So what is her platform?
Well, you'd have to ask her. I'm not sure. I mean, I've been focused on really my work as a competent professional election administrator and chief motor vehicle officer to simply ensure our government works well for everyone and that our democracy produces reliable, safe, secure results. And I know, but my opponent has spoken out significantly about her views and the conspiracy theories she ascribes to. But despite all of what she has said, in my view, voters are and should rightly be focused on the question of what is the truth and really who has a track record for furthering the truth and acting with integrity in our state. And it's particularly marked that, on election night in 2020, while I was working to ensure every valid vote was counted, she was actually trying to interfere with the counting of valid votes in Detroit. And, the fact that she still has not accepted or acknowledged that the results of the 2020 presidential election in Michigan were indeed an accurate reflection of will of the people, I think says all you need to know about her position and her willingness to nullify the votes of millions of Michiganders simply because she disagrees with them.
With that said, can you walk us through these two scenarios if you're elected and if your opponent is elected, and what that looks like in 2024, for example?
Well, certainly in 2020, we saw how democracy prevailed because people of integrity on both sides of the aisle stood guard and held the line and ensured that truth and integrity prevailed and that the will of the people ruled the day. And in my office as the chief election officer, there's really three ways in which you can both protect the vote and ensure, even in a perilous moment, the will of the people rules the day. And we did that by, pushing back against lies and misinformation with truth and facts and data and hundreds of audits that reaffirmed the election results. We worked to ensure the election itself, secondly, was administered in a way that was secure and accessible to all. And then thirdly, we worked to ensure the election results were canvassed and ultimately certified. And then once certified, that the rightful slate of electors was what was transmitted to Washington. So if you flip that and you have someone like my opponent in charge of our elections, imagine each of those things going the opposite way. Instead of the Secretary of State being a trusted source of truthful information, you'd have the potential for an individual to use this platform and the spotlight that comes with it to spread lies and to validate conspiracy theories. You'd secondly have a chief election officer who may implement policies making it more difficult or confusing for voters to simply vote or participate in democracy and making it more challenging for election administrators to run smooth, secure elections. And then finally, in perhaps most perilously, you would have an individual who would be willing to block certification of a fair and free election simply because she disagrees or they disagree with the results. And as someone who, if a candidate or the former president himself were to call and say, find me 11,000 votes, this could be someone who would say, yes, I will do that. as opposed to someone who would simply refuse to do that and uphold the law. It truly is, to the extent that there's a fabric underlying our entire government. If you pull the threads out of that fabric, it will fray and dissolve. And pulling out fair election administrators and secretaries of state and replacing them with election deniers simply does create a disintegration of democracy itself. It's akin to putting a arsonist in charge of a fire department, a bank robber in charge of the bank safe, and ultimately would lead to the destruction of our ability as citizens to choose who runs our government and hold them accountable.
So with all of that said now, what's the polling looking like in this race so far? Give me a snapshot of the race as it stands today.
There are a significant number of undecided voters in this race and in many other Secretary of State's races around the country because they don't capture the same amount of attention as a gubernatorial or a Senate race. I've been gratified that there has been a lot of eyes on this race in this cycle, but in Michigan, there's still a significant proportion of the population who may just see two names, one with a D and one with an R after it, and make their choice accordingly. So our work between now and Election Day over the next 7 weeks is to make sure as many voters as possible know the truth, know the clear choice in this race. And my hope is that if we can do that successfully, then we will be successful in protecting democracy this November.
I understand when you say that obviously these Secretary of State races don't get the same attention that a gubernatorial race or a Senate race is going to get, for example. But with that said, do you still sense anything of a shift from a few years back when Secretary of State races were probably the most obscure races on the ballot?
Yes. In fact, in 2008, I wrote a book on the Secretary of State office to try to encourage voters to pay more attention to these individuals who are elected in the vast majority of states and oversee everything that goes into running a fair and smooth election and ultimately protecting democracy. So I'm really glad that the spotlight has increased exponentially on these offices, that more people are paying attention than ever before and understanding the real weight of their vote and their choice in these races. And that gives me a lot of hope that democracy won't just prevail through this moment, but if voters so choose, we could emerge out of this moment with a stronger, healthier, more robust democracy than ever before, with more eyes and attention being paid to the processes of how we elect our representatives and the importance of making sure those processes, regardless of who emerges as the victor, operate with integrity.
So I've started asking this question a lot now, but I'm wondering if you've had any memorable interactions with independents or Republicans since you've been campaigning.
Yeah, I've worked to build a cross partisan coalition of support for our campaign, which is simply based on an election administration that is grounded in professionalism and not partisanship. I just had a former Republican Congressman, David Trott, reach out to me earlier today, offering his support and wanting to know what he could do. Several business leaders as well, who have typically supported Republican candidates and consider themselves Republican, have reached out and really supported my campaign in significant ways, which is great. I think saving and protecting democracy is a team effort, and it's not a partisan one. So we've had very meaningful, supportive conversations, even with Republican lawmakers who simply broke from their party, looked at the truth behind our elections and the audits conducted, did their own investigation, and found indeed that the election was safe, secure, and an accurate reflection of the will of the people. That type of stuff gives me hope, because a lot of the reason why misinformation continues to spread is because elected officials are repeating the misinformation, some knowingly. So, but if we have more Republican leaders like I've been able to interact with, willing to simply speak the truth and tell the truth to their followers, we can, I think, get through this time in sooner rather than later.
So what's your message now to those Michiganders who might be on the fence?
I think this race, as well as the Attorney General's race and the gubernatorial race in our state, all have clear choices before the voters. It's really not a choice between a Democrat and Republican. It's a choice between truth and conspiracy theories. It's a choice between facts and experience and nonpartisan leadership and mistruths and a willingness to lie and put party first above what's best for the people and what's best for Michigan. So in my race, I'm really proud of the fact that we have completely transformed our customer service office. We've made government work for everyone in our state, and will continue to protect and ensure democracy works for everyone. And I'm proud of that record. I'm proud to and hope to continue furthering that record. And I think that the choice is clear between someone who has achieved that success and someone who seeks to dismantle it all.
All right, let's finish off with this. How can we help?
I think, one, we ask people to invest in our race. You can go to my website, votebenson.com, and make a contribution. That helps us get our message out to residents throughout Michigan. You can even see the ad we have playing on television right now, and help us fund that ad to get it out to more people. And also spread the word. I mean, there are 11 states where election deniers are running for Secretary of State. And whether it's in Michigan or in Arizona or Nevada or in several other states like Minnesota that oftentimes are off the radar, these races are critical and will determine the future of our democracy. So make sure you evaluate the candidates in every race in your ballot this year, and know that in nearly every state in this country, voters will have an opportunity to elect pro-democracy candidates and reject those who've been spreading conspiracy theories, lies, and efforts to dismantle or destruct our democracy.
That's great. We'll leave it there. Thank you for the work that you've done and that you're trying to continue to do right now. I should mention too that you're on the cover of Time magazine this week. So obviously, that sentiment is echoed in terms of how much, in terms of how appreciative people are of that work, and the work of other secretaries of state who are, working to protect our elections. So thank you for taking the time, and best of luck on the campaign trail.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.